This is Spring Office Hours, Season 4, Episode 28, Securing MCP Servers with Spring AI. My name is Dan Vega, Spring Developer Advocate at Broadcom, joined by a person with a similar name to mine, also Daniel, Mr. Daniel Garnier-Moiroux. My friend, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, 2 times this week we got to hang out. We got to hang out earlier this week for another event, so I could get used to this, my friend.
Well, I'm working on the hot new stuff, AI, MCP. So I am
Yep.
I am more show worthy these days.
No. That's not true. Every time I'm at a conference, or even when I'm not at a conference, and they show the end result of like who voted for the best presentations of the conference, you're like not even just one of them. You have like 2 of them every time. I mean, it's crazy. I understand it though.
I apply Jedi mind tricks to my audience to have them vote for me and have me on the big screen.
Ooh, that's a good idea. Maybe I need to learn that. Maybe we can talk about that this hour then.
Exactly right. This is there's 3 kinds of lies, right? Lies, damn lies, and conference ratings.
Exactly. Okay, so for anyone who doesn't know you, can you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Daniel. I work in the Spring team. I am technically in the commercial org where we do package Spring, so take Spring libraries and make products out of them. Some colleagues of mine work on this application advisor product that we have our customers can use to upgrade their Spring applications. But I do a lot of open source, and these days my focus is security, so Spring security and projects in that orbit. And these days, since everyone is doing AI, and I don't know, about 6 months ago, someone woke up and said, maybe it'd be nice to like add some like security on top of this thing.
That's kind of important.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been collaborating with the Spring AI folks to bring security stuff in there. I work on in Spring AI, but mostly on the official SDK for MCP in Java. So the model context protocol / Java SDK. I'm one of the maintainers for that, trying to get the infrastructure in place so you can add security to it.
Nice. All right, I'll echo Simon's thoughts here. If you don't know Daniel, do yourself a favor and look at his DevOps talks. Yes. You have a few out there. You have 3-hour workshops that are really good. Daniel does a great job of breaking down something which is very scary. Security is very scary, probably because we know it's all important. Like there are high stakes things that we're dealing with when we start introducing security, right? It's no longer just like a playground. So we get a little scared about it, and then we don't know what to do. So I think you do a really good job of like breaking down the concepts. In fact, I had to give one of your talks to a customer, and I did a little cramming session on your slides and some of your talks. And like after I like spent some time actually going through it, I was like, oh, he's right. Like this isn't scary as long as you like understand some of these like fundamental concepts, right?
Yep. These talks are what I wish I knew when I started.
Yeah, and I think like that's I think to me it's a sign of a good presenter, right? Because I think like we all have battle wounds, and for me like that's always been my motivation. Like when I started learning stuff, I was like, oh man, like this is really confusing to me. I don't understand it. The documentation is not really leading me in the right way. How does this work? And so I would sit down and I would like learn this thing, and I would go, I don't want anyone else to have to struggle with this. So I would write a blog post, and like these days it's like videos or presenting, right? Like, and I always found it confusing when someone would go like, what do you mean it's confusing? Here's a repo with 30,000 lines of code. What don't you understand? And like I was like, maybe I'm just dumb, but I need it like broken down for me, like in simple terms.
Yeah, and you have to like gradually expose your audience to things.
Yeah.
So this requires oversimplifying a bit, or
Yeah,
some would
yeah.
say lie. You can't give all the details because I don't have the brain power to construct this entire mental model for
Right.
myself, like this thick book of that is the
Yeah.
representation, right? I want the
Right.
important, stable parts that I can build from.
Right. And especially with something like security. I mean, Spring Security's been around what, 20 years? Like
21.
there's there's been some change there. So like yeah, yeah. Like it's like when people come to me and they're like, "Hey, I want to learn Spring." Like, where do I start? I'm like, that's a really overloaded question. Like, what are you trying to do with it? Is a probably a better starting point, right? If you can give me a starting point, the same way you always say with Spring Security, like what if you just say I'm trying to learn Spring Security, probably not going to happen. But like, here's a specific use case that I'm trying to do. Okay, let's step back, learn the fundamentals, the building blocks of security, and now you could probably answer that question, right?
Exactly. And it only took me 2 3 hour sessions to get the most important parts out.
Yep,
um,
yep.
so, you know,
One of we'll get into this MCP stuff, but I have fun catching up with you. One of the things I always like admire too about your talks, and I say this to others like Josh Long and who else am I thinking of from the security team? Josh Cummings does a great job with that, but Rob Winch is really good at like live coding. You're really good at like live coding, and I know the answer to this, but I just need the audience to hear it. Like this doesn't come naturally, right? This is something like you work on.
yeah, exactly right. It's an acquired skill.
Yeah,
Also, it's someone said to me, it's a lot of work to make it look like it's easy. So you do the work in advance, right? You
it's true.
prepare. I am a very thorough preparer. I would rehearse my talks over and over and over again until I can do them without thinking too much.
Yep,
Usually when I rehearse them, like I fail multiple
yep,
times,
yep,
and then I get used to the failure modes, right?
yeah,
Once you've
yeah,
failed, you've had 5 bugs during your rehearsals.
yep,
If you have a bug on stage, kind of know where like the class of things that it's touching, and you can't recover
yep,
from that.
yep.
So there's a lot of work there, and then I got training when I joined Spring. Before Spring, I was at Pivotal in the labs uh, business unit. We would do consulting, and we would pair program all day,
Oh,
and so I got
nice.
used to like speaking while coding. So
Yes, that helps.
explaining what I'm doing, which is exactly what you do when you live code to an audience. You're not just like
Yeah,
silently typing. You're saying, "Oh, here's what I'm doing and why," and so on. And so that's another muscle that you need to train to get this
that's a
right.
really good point. So even if you're not talking to an audience, maybe turn on a camera, just record yourself while you're typing. Maybe you can get used to like just looking at the camera and trying to type, and that would probably get that muscle memory in, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, that's really interesting. And again, I think experience helps. I mean, you've been writing Spring Security code for a while, so
Yes.
the kind of muscle memory of writing Spring Security code. I don't need to like look at every character. I can look at the audience while I'm kind of typing this, right?
Exactly, exactly. And when you look at it, the amount of code that we write when we do live coding is not that much because
Yeah, true.
it would be boring to have too much. So
Right. You
again,
can only
it's
do so much in an hour
there's
or
that.
three.
Well, I mean, I guess Josh can do 3 times as much as anyone else, but
That's true.
uh,
I'm
but when you
still not convinced that Josh is not a robot. So
but when you look at it, when you actually get like the output on one of those sessions, it's not a lot of code, right?
right.
It's a small subset because that's what it's the vector for what you're trying to convey to the audience. And so if
Yes.
it's too much, people get lost in the code. So you
Yes,
have to keep it.
I was just going to say that, and I think we kind of have a similar approach. I think you do it through like, here's some starting code. Let me talk you through it, and then let's write some code together. I do the same, and maybe I have live templates for like the boring stuff. Like
Mhm.
you don't want to watch me type out like a record class or like some boring like repository, right? Like we're here to look at the security bits, not the stuff around that.
Right.
So, and if we typed all that out, like we wouldn't get much done in an hour. So,
Yeah, exactly. Well, you do trade to type a little bit faster and have a few
yes,
shortcuts.
yeah.
And and one of the things that people like about this is the showmanship, right?
Yes.
You're on stage, you're juggling with your IDE, and
And your
oftentimes there are people
jokes.
and your
And your
jokes,
jokes.
but like oftentimes it's like going to the circus, right? Some people are juggling with swords, and we're just like using IDE shortcuts, and it's very
Right.
impressive when
Right.
you look at it. You often have people that come to me asking about, what like settings I'm using in the IDE, or
Yeah.
like what shortcuts, like how do you do this? Um, so there's a little bit of glitter to make
Yes.
this a little bit snazzy and
Look
fun.
over here, but watch. I kind of liken it to like I haven't run races in a while, but I like to run. And the race itself, the 5K, the 10K, the marathon, whatever it is, that's generally the easy part, right? Like it's not easy, but like you've done all the work. Like you
Right.
put so much work in to prepare for that race that there should be no surprises that day. You've done everything. Like I know this is gonna hurt. This is not gonna feel good, but I'm ready for it.
I'll trust you on that one. I am not the running type.
But it's a similar thing. Like you said, you put in a lot of preparation. Okay, let's start talking about MCP. So MCP hasn't even been around a year yet. So November of last year, the protocol came out.
Yeah.
And it's really I like to think of it as like, okay, APIs are for clients and services talking to each other, whereas MCP is for LLMs. Like it's a model agnostic way to provide additional context. Like when we start working with large language models, the biggest thing that we need to think about is context, because they're trained up to a certain date. They don't have access to real-time data.
Right.
And when we start asking large language models questions that it can't answer, we can't have it just making up stuff. We need to like be able to provide some context so that it can do something, right?
And there's also the other bit of like these things, they take text mostly, right? Language models, but
Yeah,
you have multi-model models that take images as well. But like
for
they
sure.
take bytes in and then they give you bytes back. So you send them text and then they send you text back,
Right.
which is cool, right? But in the beginning, you would like chat with ChatGPT, and it would give you snippets of text that you would go and paste in your IDE.
Mm-hmm.
And so also one of the insights of this MCP thing is like I want this text that contains instruction to be able to touch the outside world and effectuate and do things. And like
Mm-hmm.
one of the obvious things is like I want to let ChatGPT modify all the files on my machine without having me to like go back and forth between windows and copy stuff.
Right.
So it's also a way, so we're providing context, but we're also taking orders from the LLM to apply
Right.
them to local files, to my an external database, a
Right.
company SaaS system, right? If I want to pre-file my expenses and the expense tracking software, right? As like, oh, look in this directory and then parse the images and then make
Yep.
the API calls that are required so that, and then I can go and verify them, but I don't have to retype everything.
Right. Yeah. And so for me, that really comes down to something called tools or functions. If we're building generative AI applications, we have this idea of tools. And for me, you just kind of laid out a lot of that. But for tools, they're really good at two things. One, information retrieval. I need to augment the LM with some context, right? Or taking action, as you said, write a file, send an email, do something, right? And so that's been great for a long time. But then we started getting into like, okay, well, if I build this application over here and I need to integrate this set of functionality, I can write a tool for that. But then when we move over to the next app, I have to write that same code. And we get into that principle of dry, right? Do not repeat yourself. And so we find ourselves repeating ourselves over and over again. And we're like, okay, how can we package this up into something that each of these applications can use? And MCP was kind of born from there. And it's crazy to think that it's not even been a year yet, because it seems like adoption has really taken off. Everywhere I look, If you're on socials, you will see the acronym MCP everywhere, and it's being adopted everywhere, which is really exciting.
Right.
And I kind of liken it to, this, it's seeming this way, and I don't know, nobody knows the answers to any of these things yet, but it seems like this is going to be as big to AI as HTTP was to the internet, because it is a protocol that is kind of everybody's building around now.
Right. Although everything's moving, like AI,
Yes,
you just go to
so
bed and then
fast.
you wake up the next morning and there's a new framework, a new conceptual approach. So,
Yes.
it's it's exciting new technologies, but we're not in the okay, this is HTTP 1.1 and
Yep.
it's here to
Agreed.
stay.
I agree. I just see it as like being adopted everywhere, so that excites me. Um, so yeah, MCPs. The specification came out. We started building MCP servers. I don't know about you, but I started building like local, standard in, standard out MCP servers just to like play around with it. Like, hey, can I like connect this thing to this tool I'm using locally? And that was fun for a while. And then as people started to adopt it more and more, we thought, okay, it's probably good that we're not all like just using these things on our local machine. There's probably scenarios where we want to stand these servers up in public and have clients from anywhere be able to connect to them instead of having to install these things locally. And so that came out. There was the protocol, the transport protocol for SSE, which was server sent events. And I get confused on some of these things. I know that like that was like just a GET request and like we can send some information back. And then I believe, from the protocol standpoint, a lot of people were saying, well, what if I have this like, load balancer here and I need to like maintain some kind of session between the two. And so this idea of streamable HTTP came out where we can kind of open up a connection and leave it open and send information back and forth. Am I right so far?
So
Does that
yeah,
sound
we
right?
had in the initial spec, it was really like works on my machine, standard
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
standard
yeah. I
out,
like that.
and the the thing that came with this is like it was supposed to be running in your Claude desktop, in your desktop app, really.
Hmm.
Um, and so it opened the door to bi-directional communication between the client and the server. So
Hmm.
think of it, if you're a client, you give it access to your file system to read files.
Yep.
um, it, it it can query stuff back and forth, right? You can say, oh, what's in there, and then you send back the response. But maybe you could say, oh, I want these types of files, and then you can notify some stuff. It'll say like, oh, there's like I have 1 million files in this directory. Do you want to see them or not? Like the
Hmm.
CLI would do. And so it's able to ask you questions as well, like the MCP server, right? The MCP thing that you had on your machine. And so over standard in, standard out, very easy, right? You're writing to standard in as the MCP client and then reading from standard out. And so you can
Yep.
get the responses and also the queries from the MCP thing that runs.
Yep.
And then over the internet, like they first implemented this with the server sent events, and they kind of emulated what you had before, right? So it's like open a connection
Yep.
and then you send post requests and then you get the answer back on the open SSE channel. And
Mm.
then, as you said, that was clunky. Not everybody could support that, or not in every case. And so in March, in November, first version of the protocol came out. In March, the second version came out, and then they abandoned the initial HTTP setup and said, like, don't do this anymore. Now you want to be doing streamable HTTP, which is a kind of a normal HTTP. You do post requests and then you get responses on that, but it can also upgrade to provide this like capabilities. So for example, maybe your MCP uh, tool can ask you to fill a form, because depending on the country you're in, it does different things. And so your MCP client is going to say, "Whoa, like file this expense for Daniel in France," and then the MCP tool, like you don't know in advance all the possibilities of filing this form because there's like 20 countries, and so that would be 20 different forms, and you don't want to pass 20 different params to every call. And so you say file for Daniel in France, and then the MCP server comes back and says, "Okay, please file this." And so as Daniel, I type into my tool and it does stuff. And so it's also capable of doing that, but it requires upgrading to like a long-lived server sent event stream. So it's kind of, it takes the good ideas of the first one and then simplifies for the other use cases.
Cool. And from us, since we are talking Spring here today, from a Spring perspective, we have supported STDIO and SSE kind of since it was available.
Right.
If you are looking to implement something like streamable HTTP, 1.1.0 is out there in a milestone right now. I believe it's still milestone 3.
Yes.
But that should be coming at some point. And that has, I just did a video on this on YouTube. So if you're interested, check it out. But this makes building MCP servers so much easier. You don't have to provide any of these like tool callbacks or any of that. You just define like an @MCP tool and it just works. And so that version supports the streamable HTTP. Now, I did get one other question that I had to like ask our internal folks about it. I don't know if you saw me chiming in this morning, but so we have this idea of streamable HTTP. We can also say stateless. Like we don't need to care about a session here. And I think from everything I've learned, it's if you're doing anything advanced like sampling or elicitations, or you need to hold on to a session, then you need it to be streamable. In the example of like a load balancer, you would probably have to like leave it at streamable. But if you're just building like a simple MCP server, you can use the stateless option.
Right. Most of the so you shared a few of the things that that require this stateful, which is open a connection, and then we can discuss while this connection is open. So one is sampling. That means your MCP server can pass you questions back to ask to the LLM. So your Spring AI application makes a query to the MCP server, and then the MCP server answers with a question that you should pass to the LLM. And so your Spring application is in control, right? The MCP server is not calling directly into the LLM, but the idea is that other thing is elicitation, being able to type and respond to the MCP server rather than going through the LLM. We can also do logging. So the MCP server can send you logs of what it's doing, and we can do progress for long running tasks. You want to like show a progress bar or something, then send tokens. Anything that is not that, you don't need to have an open connection, and so you can just do like a post request, and then you get a response, and then you can consume that response, and that's it. And so it is not defined in the standard as a separate thing, but the standard like alludes to it. It says like, well, it can be stateful, but it means when we say can in the spec, right, it means it may be stateful, but it also may not, and it's fine.
May not,
And so in that case, what we've provided in the core MCP SDK for Java that then Spring AI integrates is this concept of a stateless transport. So with this, you are sure that there's no long-running connection. So you can run this across load balancers, and that's fine. There's no session open between the client and the server. And so it provides you with the guarantee that you're not going into that more complicated network territory.
So, okay, so those are the transports. We decide that like, okay, we're gonna stop building locally. We're gonna start putting these in the public. I start seeing all these articles pop up, and I'm not picking on GitHub here because it's happened to like everyone, but like I saw an article from GitHub, like they made this public MCP server and then started exposing people's private repositories because security wasn't implemented correctly. And again, it's not on the GitHub folks. I think it's more of like, it was an afterthought right?
Right.
When we started MCP, and it was like, oh, now we need to like implement security. How are we going to do that? And so, how has that gone? Like, I know you've dug into the specification a little bit. There's a little bit of a timeline there, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we had the initial spec in November 2024, the initial protocol version, and like this had nothing about security because it
Yeah.
runs on your machine. So you're kind of responsible for who's allowed to launch what process and which environment variables you're going to be passing to that process. And so you deal with it.
Right.
And since you're actually you're kind of a power user anyway, you're going to be feeding stuff into that. And then with SSE, then there was nothing about security. And so they worked on it on the second version. And the general thing was like, well, in March, they came out and said, just put OAuth on it and it'll be fine. And by saying put OAuth on it, it means like put all of OAuth into your MCP server. And like when I say all of OAuth, it was really all of OAuth. So then your MCP server became a resource server. So when a request comes in, it validates the token. It was also an authorization server, so it needed to be able to issue tokens. And most of the times it would be an MCP client as well. So that's the spec that came in March. And the response from the community was like, well, that's too much, right? That's not what we want to be doing here. In Java, if you wanted to build this, you kind of had to use Spring because we were the only ones with like the full OAuth stack easily implementable. And so 3 months later, they came with a revision to the spec. And they say, okay, well, we heard you, right? Everyone came out and said like, well, an MCP server cannot be managing identities and issuing tokens. That is just too hard.
Yeah.
And so they removed this part and they said, well, an MCP server is an OAuth resource server. So when you make the post request to the MCP server, you must present a JWT token to it saying this is a call and the person I'm doing this call on behalf of is Daniel. And so on the server side, it's much easier to implement, like, right, parse the token, decide what you do with it. On the client side, it's still harder because that token comes from somewhere, so you have to go and get it. And there's a whole lot of nuance that, OAuth is very much traditional OAuth. You go into your console, right? Their Azure console, and then the Azure portal, and then you click, and then you create a client, and then you have a client ID, a client secret. You copy those over, you deploy them and everything. But that doesn't really work with MCP when it runs on your local, when you run Cloud Desktop on your local machine. And I just want to point to a server. And so they said, well, now we must dynamically register clients. And so it's like this whole entire complicated flow of many things that you need to do.
Right.
And so then but it was simpler, at least on the server side. So the server implementers now were, okay, this was reasonable. And so in Spring and in the SDK, we started working on like, okay, how do we support this?
Right.
So in the SDK, we didn't do any of the security because like the security code is the one that's going to get the most CVEs. And so the Java SDK is really designed to be used within a framework. So you can run a Java payload that has no framework, just an MCP server built from the SDK. This is fine.
Yep.
But like if you're going to implement security in it, it's probably going to live within a Spring application, for example, or our friends at Micronaut, right? And they already have everything about security. They're maintaining it. So in the SDK, we made the SDK ready for security. And then in Spring AI, we started a project so that you could easily add security to your MCP server. And so that took us, the best part of the summer. But unfortunately, like during the summer, the number one author from the OAuth 2 spec, so Mr. Dick Hart, came up on the MCP specification repo and was like, well, I've worked with OAuth a long time, and I was discussing this, and MCP OAuth is not a good fit for securing the communication between the server.
Oh no!
Yeah. So although this has not been, so he's coming up with other ways of doing things. It's not been approved, but it's just to show you that it's very fluid, right? We're still,
Hmm.
everyone is starting to build this thing on auth, and then like the auth guy comes up and says, well, actually, maybe it's not a good idea. So we'll see where this lands in 6 months. Auth seems to be taking hold, even though it's
Yeah.
refining and they're trying to get it simpler. But a new standard might come out on the security side. So we're listening to those channels and seeing how
Gotcha.
we can contribute to the discussion.
For those of us listening on the podcast and not joining us on the live stream here, I'm taking a look at this, which is github.com/org Spring AI community. If you're not familiar with this is a really good resource for all the things we're doing in Spring AI that maybe not are not like official projects or something we've moved into like the umbrella yet. But it's also a place for the community to contribute things. So I know I worked a lot on this repo called Awesome Spring AI, which has like a whole bunch of curated resources and tutorials if you want to learn Spring AI. So that's one. But this is where the MCP security stuff is, right? So this is, like you said, this is so fluid. This is really a good place for this because we don't know where this is going to go in the next 6 months, right?
Exactly. And so we don't want to push it to the core of Spring AI just yet.
Yep.
Because Spring AI is moving a lot already.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to keep a little bit of freedom to move these implementations around. But the idea, this is mostly glue code between MCP and Spring Security, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and with the simplest possible API to do things.
Right.
And yeah, it's been going for a little while. We have some feedback a little bit. People are interested into this. It's still early days. We're going to be porting that to Spring Framework or Spring Boot 4, Framework 7, Security 7 when it comes out next month.
Yep. Yep.
Because some of the security bits are actually implemented in this repo by the security team, but we're moving that to like Spring Security proper, and you'll depend on the real Spring Security bits that are tested
Right.
and updated and so on.
Cool. So I want to take a look at the article in a second. I just want to get to some questions here. I have a question with MCP servers. I have sometimes run into an issue where my tools need to invoke multiple other tools concurrently, and the auth context gets lost. I ran into a similar issue when my agentic AI application tried to invoke the same tool or multiple tools concurrently. So I think that's one important thing to point out is that like you have no control over what tools the large language model is calling, right? Like this is invoked, but well, it's the code is invoked by you, but what tool to run is model driven. You can give it suggestions. So I've done so in prompts before, like, hey, I have this tool. If you run into a question like this is probably a really good tool to use. And that may call it, but it's not always a guarantee that it will call that tool. So coming back to this, I ran an issue where my tools need to invoke multiple other tools concurrently, and the auth context gets lost.
So
I wonder.
so we would have to go very much into specifics here.
Yeah.
But really, so what we've tried to do is that we know that the number one use case, people are building stuff with Spring Web MVC. So we
Mm-hmm.
optimized for that. If you're
Mm-hmm.
using Spring Web MVC, Spring AI, and MCP security, the primitives that you have in Spring Security, so the security context holder .get context, is available, and so it is in here in your tool. But all of Spring AI is built on a reactive core, so it's all built on Project Reactor, and it's the same for the MCP SDK. And so this tends to do things where, like you give work to this reactor thing and like it spreads it over multiple threads that you have no control over. And so in there, the Spring Security model in MVC, which is through thread locals, gets lost because now it's not in the
Mm,
thread that was making the original request. So the
right.
first hop gets the tool, that's fine. The second hop, then, if you're calling into the MCP, uh, internals to call other tools, then you're losing the context here. And it's for you to go and propagate manually this context. So we make it easy
Mm,
to build an MCP server that does one thing, responds to that, but further into a call stack, we can't really control that.
right. Right.
And so, and you're building more advanced stuff, right? You have like an MCP server that calls, like you get a tool call, and then you make other tool calls within the same server or to another server. And so in here, what I would really recommend to look into is the MCP SDK documentation. So if you go to the model context protocol / SDK / Java,
Mm,
or something like that, right? You'll find the GitHub repository. There's a link to the documentation. Surprisingly enough, we're the only project, the Java SDK is the only project that maintains their documentation on modelcontextprotocol.io, but here it is. And you'll find there how you can build context that you pass to your tools internally. So they're not an argument. So it's not like if you want to know a user's email, you don't have to prompt it. Like you don't have to prompt and say like, oh, by the way, what's your email? And I say,
right.
I'm Alice at example.com.
Right.
Whereas,
Of
I'm
course I
not
am.
Alice. So, I present a token, and then there are ways for you to say like, okay, I got these HTTP bits, and then I'm going to use those HTTP bits, the header, and then get the sorry the email from that, or from the
Right.
Spring Security context. And so you have ways for you to go and say like, okay, I'm going to feed some data in, and here's how I can consume it from the tool.
Instead of the opposing, which instead of like polluting a bunch of code where you have to always use the security to get the context holder to get the context,
Which
you
is
don't.
lost anyway.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
because the
Right.
reactor thing is kind of bad for this.
Right.
And
Right.
also the tools we expose in Spring Security. So if you're writing Spring AI, sorry. So if you're writing Spring AI MCP tools, you do, as you said, like very easy. I do at MCP tool, and I have a method. That
Hmm.
method returns a blocking type. That
Yes.
method is not reactive.
Yes.
If it lives inside a Webflux Spring AI project with an async reactor MCP server,
Yes.
it is called, but it loses the reactor context, which is what Spring Security uses to pass the security context in case of reactive. And so
Right.
there's work for you to do to breach these two worlds.
Yep.
And it's good that you bring that up, because if we get signal from the community that we should work on that, then
Perfect.
we'll get more signal like to
Yeah.
prioritize, because there's just too much on AI.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just
For
changes
sure.
all the time. And so we have willfully not prioritized reactive.
Yep.
Maybe that's one of the things we'll work on next.
Great. Yeah, I got a question like that after I posted the video yesterday on MCP servers with the newest version of Spring AI. And somebody was like, wait a minute, you use Spring MVC, but you had to specify async is true. Like, wouldn't it just always be async? And I guess, like you said, the possibility of building the same way that in an MVC app, you could use a web client and call block on it, right? Like
Mhm.
we are not forcing you to just like be in the MVC stack and never use a web client. The same way with that, with the MVC, with the MCP, even though I picked MVC, the Webflux bits are all there. Like everything's there for my availability. If I wanted to use some async capabilities, I could.
Right.
So yes, they should match up. Like an MVC should be async or sync, and a reactive app should be async, but we don't kind of tie you into that. We don't force you into that, right? So yeah, if you ever like see a configuration for a server and like see that stuff, that's why.
And unless you have like high throughput on
But
blocking
right,
IO needs,
yep,
for MCP, I would go with WebMVC
right,
and sync,
yep,
because with virtual threads and with what we have
yep,
in integrations, we have better integrations with sync,
mm-hmm,
security being one of those. So go with sync. If
yeah,
you really have to, then async but then you have to start asking questions like, well, my method doesn't return a reactive type. That's probably not right. And so
Like, wait a minute.
we have the configuration options. You can this Java SDK provides some low level APIs, or lower level than at MCP tool. And so you would be building those manually, and then in there you have the reactive types at hand. So you will be building an async tool specification and so on.
Cool. All right. So, man, look at this. 40 minutes. We haven't even talked about your article yet. It's just so fun hanging out with you, Daniel. So for those on the listening and not watching, there is an article called Securing MCP Servers with Spring AI. It uses that project we talked about that is kind of the glue code over on the Spring AI community. And I thought this was a great article because it kind of broke it down into like two sections, right? They're really, you're kind of laying out two ways to secure an MCP server. At a high level, what are those two ways that we're securing these servers?
So the first way is the spec compliant auth to MCP security bits. So basically, this is what the spec says. As a security person, I am a bit flustered by a spec that changes every 3 months. This is not in the security world, in the IETF, sorry, spec world. This is like a draft of a draft. It's like not even on the RFC track just yet. But be that as it may, we do try and follow to be compatible with the rest of the ecosystem. And so we bring all the bits that you need so that your MCP server can receive tokens and then get the context, or get the identity of the user and the permissions of the user based on that context. So that's the first and the biggest chunk. But we've heard from customers and from partners. So we've worked on this with, we have friends and partners at Google, at AWS, and some people working at Anthropic as well. And we've heard, well, our customers, they come to us and they say, yeah, this auth thing is fine, very happy with it, but all of our existing REST APIs, they have API keys. And so now to make an MCP server, I have to buy into the whole auth stack, because the client must do auth, my MCP server must do auth, and now I must manage identities in an authorization server that supports all these like bleeding edge specs and so on. And so we also propose a second way of securing MCP servers with API keys, which is a much simpler thing, right? It's the user, you create an API key for a given user, entity, company, whatever. You distribute that. They send the API key in every request. And when the request comes in, we check the API key and we can give you the identity of who made that request.
This is great. And like, for me, this is, as you said, a much easier approach. Even if you didn't have all of this existing infrastructure already in place, this is, if I'm just so I built a silly example MCP server. If I wanted to go ahead and secure it, probably not going to like get all of this other thing, like an authorization server involved. Like, it's a lot of work. So this is a nice approach to that. But also, if I'm a bank, I probably am using hardened something like an authorization server already. And so working that into my existing workflow will probably be something I want to look at.
Exactly. And we don't know where all of this is going. So we're trying to stay close to what the spec is doing. There's a new version coming out in November. The first anniversary edition of MCP. And so there's new stuff we need to do on auth for that to make it even simpler to reinforce the trust. And because
is this something like that you kind of already know what's happening? Or are you just going to wake up one day and see a new spec and go, oh,
no. So if you went to the MCP website, you'll see, you go to specification and they have a drop down. And so the drop down has the latest, right? The current spec, and it has a draft section, which has a draft in it. All of this comes from a GitHub repository.
Okay.
And there are lengthy discussions going on.
That's good. That's good.
About what you need to do. And so when something is actually accepted and they say, okay, we're going to do this, then they mark this as accepted, they add it to the spec, and then they ask the SDKs to implement these new things.
All right. So I haven't built an example using the API keys yet. I'm just walking through the article for anyone who's listening. So we see that we define an MCP server. The protocols are streamable and stateless, which, as we just learned, is really the same thing. One is just not maintaining state. So they're both kind of streamable protocols. And then we define some configuration. And so the new bits that I've seen when I was building like the authorization server example one is we have this. So just like we do with Spring Security, we define a bean of type security filter chain.
Mhm.
And in there, we can do things like authorize requests. So in this case, we're saying any request needs to be authenticated. But then we have this with method. What is this? Is this new for this? Is this? I haven't seen this before.
This is not new.
Okay.
So Spring Security, the pattern for configuring Spring Security in MVC, you do a security filter chain, and reactive is like a server security filter chain. Basically the same words, but you append to it, and you provide a bean of that type, one or more of these beans, and then you pass a builder object. So this has a dependency, which is a prototype bean of type HTTP-security. And on this builder object, you can do http.authorize HTTP request. And here you say, oh, this is allowed, this is for everyone, this is for admins, this is denied, and so on. Then you can do, say, .form login, because I want my users to be able to log in with username, password into my website, or .auth2 login if I use auth2, or .csref because I don't understand csref and it's very scary, so I want to disable it. so all these methods, what they actually do is they interact with this builder by touching. So you pass a lambda inside the method. The lambda changes an object that's called a configurer. So there's a configurer for authorize HTTP request. There's a configurer for form login. There's a configurer for resource server, for SAML, for form login, and so on. But it's this concept of configurer. You can use that yourself. You can bring your own thing. So if you're within a company and you have the same security rules you want to apply to everyone, then you can create your own, like, my company configurer. And to distribute this, you cannot change the HTTP security object because this is published in Spring Security, right? So you could publish your own wrapper, which, it's a lot to maintain. You have to follow what HTTP security is doing. Or you instruct your teams to use with, and then you pass a configurer into it. And so in here, we're doing with MCP API key configurer, or with a method that's the static method that says MCP server API key, which gives you a configurer for API keys, because I'm not allowed to add .api key to the HTTP security builder. And then the second thing is a lambda that modifies this configurer so that the same patterns apply.
So you're giving us a way to hook into this HTTP security object without because like you said, we have all of these predefined methods or configures that we can use, and then with gives us like an overall way to like add our own.
Exactly.
Love it. So we have this. So MCP API key configure, I guess, is something that is coming from this project that you said is kind of the glue code.
Exactly.
Gotcha. And then this is a way to define an API key. And so in the builder, you define a name. Here's a test API key, an ID, a secret, a build. How does that work? Like, so the secret, I'm guessing you don't want to just hard code in here, right? Like,
yes, exactly. So
this is an example.
So we want to give you, so the philosophy of design in Spring projects in general is we give you an interface, right? And our code works with those interfaces. And so in here, what we've done is we've implemented the API key by saying, okay, this API key represents someone, or something. And I don't know in advance what that is. So we have provided an API key entity primitive. And so this API key entity has basically an ID, and then you can add whatever you want to it.
Okay.
And we have an implementation of that, which uses bcrypt. So the idea here is there are many ways to do API keys. Every company has their own way of doing things. So GitHub, you've seen, they do like GHP for personal, GHO for OAuth, and so on. So we've gone with the approach that a key has an ID, and we don't want to store plain text stuff, right? We want to bcrypt or Argon code, like Argon hash things, so that in your database, your API key is not in clear text. The only party that has a clear text API key is the user you gave it to when it was first created. So that's a secret. But if you just store the secret, you can't look it up, right? You would have to compare any call with anything.
Yeah.
So the structure of our API keys is when someone makes a request, they send the ID of the API key. So in this example, I said API 01, and then the secret. So in here, it's my custom API key. So they send us a header with API 01 dot my custom API key.
Right.
But in my database, if I really implement this, and if I don't do in memory, like the interfaces that we provide here, I would store the bcrypt hash of this my custom API key. So this compares the, or whatever hashing algorithm I use. This compares the secret. So it says, yes, I know that user, and that user knows a secret as well. Right?
Gotcha. Cool. Well, that seems pretty easy.
So it's fairly straightforward. We provide an in-memory implementation with like safe defaults, but it's trade-offs. So here we're using bcrypt. If you're using bcrypt is designed to be expensive, like computationally expensive. So it's hard to crack. But that means if you have a high throughput application and you check the API keys on every request, it's going to blow up your CPU bills. So it's that's why we only have an in-memory implementation. We give you the simple interfaces you have to implement, and then it's for you to check, what you want to do for your security, if you want to do caching, if you want to do different types of crypto and so on.
It's crazy how everything in software engineering comes down to it depends.
yeah. And we do have to provide good first options. That's why we have this in-memory implementation, because we don't want you to have to read like a thesis on how to encrypt stuff just to be able to run a Spring Boot application.
Right.
But like providing something that works for everyone is much harder. You'll notice if you look back at this MCP security project we have here, you'll notice there are no auto configurations shipped with this. You do have to string a few classes together yourself. That is because auto configuration is one of the hardest things to do, like, period. Like Spring Boot is a hero project that makes stuff work and makes it gradually extensible. That is very, very, very hard to do, to have a good opinion that people can then modify as they want.
Right. And especially with all of this changing so much, there's probably no point in having that right now. Exactly. Okay. So I'll quickly talk about the other one, because I went through this, which is using an authorization server. And so if you look at Daniel's article, the first thing you do, again, you're providing some configuration class for your security configuration. You're defining a security filter chain. Again, we're saying authorize requests. Here is that with method again, which is going to configure OAuth 2 on the MCP server. So MCP server OAuth 2 configurer, I'm guessing, now that I know a little bit more, is what is coming from that project over on Spring AI community. And what this is doing is defining an authorization server. And then do we want to enforce the odd claim in the JWT token?
So I put all the configuration options in here. This is like advanced OAuth. If you follow the spec, you should be setting that, but like not every identity provider follows the spec. So you may or may not want to add it. That's why it's optional. What you really need to do is like a JWT token is going to come in, how do I, as an MCP server, as an OAuth resource server, how do I validate it? And the way you validate it is by saying, well, it should be issued by this authorization server here, which has keys to sign the token, and I'm going to use the keys by this authorization server that I trust to validate the tokens. And so that's the only thing you need to pass. Cool. There are other, more advanced customization options coming in the version 0.3 here. We don't expose that this is like if you want to go nuts and like, oh, how do I validate my JWT tokens? And maybe I have like symmetric keys and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. And then the one thing that I found a little confusing, because there is a dance to this. I had the MCP server working, I had the security working, and then I set up an authorization server. And then this is when you and I had to like do a little pair of programming, because like from a command line, like you have the examples in here on like how you could test this out. Mm-hmm. But figuring out that whole handshake of like how this works from the client to the OAuth resource server to the authorization server and back, not a lot of fun. So you can actually do this whole handshake right in something like the MCP inspector, mm-hmm. which is what I've used before to kind of test these out. And that is really nice. So you can open up the OAuth settings. There's a quick OAuth flow. So if everything works, it just goes down and checks all those things off. And
you have to log in. So at some point it will redirect you to your auth server.
I was already logged in when we were doing that. Yeah. Yep. So it redirects you, you log in, and it gets like the code and sets everything up, and you're good to go, and everything kind of works. This was much easier for me than trying to do this from the command line and browser and figure all of this out. So if you don't do it this way and you run into an error, there's a guided OAuth flow, which is like, here is that whole dance. Here's step 1. Does that work? Yes. Does step 2 work? Yes. Oh, step 3 failed. Now we at least have some indication of what's going wrong, right?
Exactly.
So if you're going to do the authorization server example, definitely check. I mean, even if you're just building MCP servers, the MCP inspector is a tool that you'll want to have.
Exactly, because this OAuth dance is complicated, and it will help you find, even if you don't build your own authorization server and you use an existing off-the-shelf one, it will show you what's going wrong so that you can go click your buttons in Keycloak or whatever to enable the things that are missing.
Cool. All right. If you're interested, github.com/Dan Vega MCPS. I have also put a diagram in here because I like building mental models of like how this stuff works because it helps me out. So there's some code in here for that. There's obviously Daniel's article, which I'll leave in the show notes for today. There's samples in the Spring AI community project for this as well, if you want to take a look at some samples there. So.
And if I can recommend something, if you want to see a little bit like the bleeding edge of MCP, people at gofastmcp.com, they implement a Python version of this, and they try to keep as close to the draft of the spec as possible, and they invent like 6 authentication methods and so on. And so if you want to see what the community is doing, what the ideas are, and you're interested in more than just the stable bits that change every 3 months, then GoFastMCP is a very interesting project.
Awesome.
But it's in Python, so you should be able to read stuff easily.
Yeah. All right, Daniel, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with me today. Before we say goodbye, if anybody wants to find you on the internet, if you want to be found, if not, you can hide. They'll probably find you. Where can they find out more about you and all of the wonderful things you're doing?
So I am on Blue Sky at Garnier, GARNIER.WF.
Mm-hmm.
I am also on LinkedIn. So if you look up my name, there's basically 2 people with my name. One dude who looks like a member of the Beatles with a mustache. That's my dad. He hasn't updated his profile pictures in a while, I think. And so the other one will be me,
all right.
likely. And then, just look up my name online. You'll find all my contact info.
Unless you're listening to this podcast 20 years from now, maybe you'll look like that.
Maybe I'll grow the mustache. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, Will MCP be a thing? Will software engineering be a thing anymore?
I'm
Maybe
I'm
the world.
banking on it. Yes,
Right.
yes.
I
Although
agree.
I mean I'll still be doing it. So
Yeah, it will be a very different shape and a
for
very
sure.
different set of tools. But
Yep. I always tell everybody like no matter what is happening, just be willing to adapt and you'll be fine in whatever you want to do. So
yeah, and be excited by like
yeah,
learning stuff and change. Yeah,
curiosity
exactly,
is like the one of the greatest like skills you can have. Like just be curious
exactly.
about everything.
Don't be too curious because then you get burnt out after a
Oh,
while.
then it's shiny object syndrome. You're just chasing everything.
Yeah,
I
we're
have
getting
that
too old for
problem.
this. Oh no,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
still young. You're still young in your head. I'm too old for this. I work in security. Like my spec has to be 10-year-old to
You're
be
right,
like
right.
worthy.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Daniel, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for talking MCP security. We'll have to do it again when the spec changes in a few months. So,
All right, we'll come back.
all
And
right.
thanks. It's been a lot of fun. Cheers.
Thanks everyone. Have a good one. We'll see you next
Bye-bye.
week.